you know anything about Paul's life, you know that when he went to a new town, he did not know if it would end in revival or his execution, maybe both. You are equally uncertain about your future, and you should often acknowledge that. Only the fool looks at his past and fails to see God's hand of grace in it. Even worse, only the fool looks at the future and thinks it is under his control. God enables, God raises up, God empowers. And so James says, rather than boastfully saying, tomorrow I'm gonna go do this or that, verse 15, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. He's saying reject, even in your speech, the arrogant assumption that you really are in control of your lives. Don't make God do something to prove that to you. Honestly, y'all, this is so unnatural for us Americans. We love this sense that we are the masters of our fate and the captains of our souls. Though at the end of the Back to the Future series, if you made it that far, Doc Brown says to Marty McFly, who after all of his flying DeLorean adventures is trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. And Doc Brown says to Marty McFly, the future, Marty, is whatever you make it. So go and make it a good one. And as Americans, we're all like, yeah, oh, I love that. Future's mine to create. Don't provoke God. In fact, the three most dangerous words in the English language might be, I got this. I got this. No, you don't. No, you don't. Not necessarily. God determines that. By the way, I think we ought to take James literally here. He's speaking literally. We ought to say often when talking about our future, if the Lord wills. I don't think James is trying to impose some legalistic rule that we're now policing each other on in their language. Oh, you talked about future, didn't say God. He's not talking about that. But he's saying that we should acknowledge to ourselves and to others often that ultimately we are not in charge of our lives, God is. That's how the Apostle Paul talked about his life. Acts 18:21, he tells the Ephesians, I will return to you again if God wills. In 1 Corinthians 4:19, he writes to the Corinthians, I will come to you soon if the Lord wills. If you know anything about Paul's life, you know that when he went to a new town, he did not know if it would end in revival or his execution, maybe both. You are equally uncertain about your future, and you should often acknowledge that. By the way, I found that in just saying that, in saying those words, it cultivates humility in me. Humility. Here's the second word that should define a fleeting, forgettable, fragile life: eternity. If your life is a mist, you need to think about what actually matters. You ever think about how short your life is compared to eternity? Several years ago, I saw a guy do an illustration that really gripped me. I never forgot it. He said, let this rope right here represent your life. So this red part represents your life. I don't know if you can see it, you probably can't, but this little mark right here represents your birth. This little dash right here, that represents, that's when you graduated high school. That was a big time. And as you went on, this is when you got married and have kids, right? Then this represents this kind of long thing, your post-kid life, your retirement. This represents when you retire, and then we'll at the end of this represent your death. Different ones of you have different experiences here, and you got, maybe you're somewhere toward the end here. I'm kind of over here toward the beginning, I think. But, it's like, this is your life. He says, but actually, when you think about it, this is kind of what your life is. This is post-death. And it just keeps going. And what I have up here is not eternal. And so it doesn't even begin to touch what eternity actually is. Maybe you're doing all the right things to make this little red part. Maybe you've made it awesome. In fact, maybe by doing the right things, you could actually lengthen the red part. Eating kale, using a standing desk, right? Avoiding weed or preservatives, rubbing yourself down with unicorn oil or whatever else the trendy magazines are telling us we should do now. Maybe you can add another couple millimeters to the red, but bottom line, you are headed for eternity. How foolish is it for you to live like that red is all there is? I mean, people love to say, YOLO, I gotta do this, YOLO, you only live once. Pack into this life everything you can. I've told you that is dumb for a Christian. If you want to get something tattooed on your wrist or wear a bracelet, let it say YALF. You actually live forever, not YOLO, YALF. One of my favorite verses, Psalm 90, verse 12, Moses says, Lord, teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to learn wisdom. Martin Luther translated that verse as teach us to think about our impending deaths that we might learn how to live now. Only by pondering the inevitability of death and its relative imminence will you begin to live wisely today. If you've heard me tell my story about what brought me to Christ as a teenager, instrumental in that was the death of a friend of mine in a car wreck. It was gruesome. And as I stood there beside his closed casket, that illusion of my immortality as a teenager was shattered. Death comes for all of us. The question is, are you gonna be ready for it when it comes? Do you know that you're saved and that you'll spend eternity in heaven? If you died this afternoon and stood before God tonight, would you be ready? How is that not the most important question you have ever considered? You're so busy working toward this and trying to accomplish this and build that and earn that over there and get your kid into this school. Do you ever stop and ask, what difference is any of that gonna make in eternity? Parents are so focused on getting your kids all the advantages, doing what it takes to get them into the right schools. Do you know that your kids know and love Jesus? You're more focused on where they go to school or where they're gonna spend eternity? And have you arranged the priorities of your life accordingly? The way Jesus said is, what's it profit a man if he gained the whole world? What would it profit a man if he had this red section right here, everything go right, absolutely everything go right, and then he lost his soul in eternity? What would it profit you? I always illustrate that to high school students. In fact, I did this recently by saying, basically, just think of it like this. If I had up here on stage with me a mountain of cash, let's say I had $5 billion up here on stage, and I said to this audience, I'll give that cash to somebody in here, but here's what's gotta happen. This is what I asked high school students. I'm like, you gotta come up here, you gotta lay your hand on this table, some dude in the back's gonna come out with a butcher knife, he's gonna cut your pinky off in front of everybody. How many of you for $5 billion would take that deal? When I ask that, it's usually, I know, it's about 70% of the audience, like, if they're young, like, I'm in. It's always disproportionately guys, but they're like, I'm in. So I'm like, all right, let me renegotiate. Let's just say not your pinky, let's say your left arm up to its elbow. $5 billion, you still in? And some hands go down. I'm like, well, let's renegotiate one more time. Or a couple more times. Let's cut it off up to your shoulder. $5 billion, but you go home with one arm. You in? Oh yeah, still, we're getting less and less, but we're in. So I'm like, okay, one more last negotiation. Both arms, both legs, we're gonna poke your eyes out, clog up your ears, clog up your nose, cut out your tongue. You go home with $5 billion. I'm like, who wants that deal? Nobody. Well, there's always one middle school kid. It's only one in every audience. I'm like, put your hand down. Because most people are like, what possible good would $5 billion do to me if I had no faculties wherewith to enjoy it? And Jesus says, yeah, that's right. And why is it that there are many people who are giving far, far more to gain far, far less? What's it profit you if you gain everything in this little red thing that you call your life on earth, and then you lose your soul in this long thing that we call eternity? Are you prepared for eternity? And are you living for things that matter? James' whole point is make the most out of your mist. Or like Amy Carmichael, the single missionary to India, said, we will have all of eternity to celebrate our victories, but only a few hours before sunset to win them. It's like what my dad always told me. Son, only one life to live, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. He would always say to me, son, there are only two things in life that last forever. Only two things that are truly eternal. One is the word of God and the other is the souls of people. So build your life on both of those. And by the way, he's living that out even now. Many of you know my dad is an active member here at the Summit Church. He's an elder at the Capitol Hills campus. After my mom passed away last year, he misses her terribly, but he's not sitting around playing golf all the time or traveling the world. His schedule is filled up with people that he's meeting with. Some of them are investigating faith. Some of them he met right down here at the altar after a service. Some of them are exploring a call to ministry. Listen, he is busier than I am. That is not a joke. I have a harder time getting on his schedule than he does on mine. And that's because he believes only two things in life last forever, and it's not golf clubs and sports cars and Tahiti vacations. Only two things in life last forever, and it's the word of God and the souls of people. So build every chapter of your life on those. Which, if you'll give me a minute, always makes me think about the people around the world who've never even heard the good news of the gospel. Whole people groups with no access at all to the gospel in light of eternity. Is there anything more urgent for us to focus on? Anything more important for us to do with our money and our time? 10 seconds into eternity. Well, we have thought anything else was more important than that. And some of you need to consider doing that with your whole life. I realize you probably didn't grow up thinking about that, and you didn't think this is what my future would be, but if our lives are missed and eternity is forever, then getting the gospel around the world is what should characterize this brief mist of a moment that we call life. We have all of eternity to celebrate our victories. We have only a few short moments before sunset to actually go win them. Let your life be characterized by eternity. Live for the things that matter. Live for the things that last forever. Make the most of your mist. So word number one is humility. Word number two is eternity. One more word I'm gonna give you on this, and then I'm gonna briefly hit those words in chapter 5 that are written specifically to the wealthy. Here's the third word, immediacy. Humility, eternity, and immediacy. James ends this section by saying, verse 17, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Because life is fleeting and fragile and forgettable, do not put off until tomorrow anything you know you should do today. So here's the question, if you were to die today, what would still be undone? I love the words of another missionary, Jim Elliot. Make it such, Lord, that when it comes time in my life to die, all I got left to do is die. Don't wait to get saved. Don't wait to tell that person about Jesus. If you unexpectedly died tomorrow morning when you were standing in eternity, who is it that you're gonna wish that you could just go back and tell about Jesus? Who are you gonna say, if I could just have 10 more minutes with that person? Don't wait to reconcile that relationship. Don't wait to say you're sorry. Make it such, Lord, that when it comes time in my life to die, all I got left to do is die. Don't wait to be generous. Don't be one of those people who saves up all your money so you can live richly on it now, telling yourself that you'll instruct other people to be generous on your behalf when you die. James is saying, no, you be generous now. If you see something good in front of you to do and you fail to do it, it's sin. That's the context of that verse. See how it connects? There are needs around you now. There are missionaries who need your support now. The church needs to do things to reach this community now. Don't wait to be generous today. There's a wealthy man at our church. He's retired now. Told me recently, he said, my goal, JD, is to give all my money now so that my last check I ever write bounces. I said, so in other words, how you see this going down is the doctor tells you got 30 minutes left to live, and you call me and a few of your family to your bedside, and then you hand me a check for the church that's no good. He said, yep, that's about right. I said, could you write us your second to last check? That is my request. Here's a question. Is there anything God has put on your heart that you haven't done yet? It's like Veronica and I often tell our kids, delayed obedience is disobedience. Make it such, Lord, that when it comes time in my life to die, all I have left to do is die. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. For lives that are fleeting and fragile and forgettable, we should live lives that are characterized by humility, eternity, and immediacy. And now, with that at the forefront of your mind, you are ready for the first few verses of chapter 5. Come now, he says, you rich. Weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. I mean, first of all, don't you love it? James, positive, encouraging, not James. You know, I mean, that's like, who is this guy? These two sections really tie together, what we just read in that, because when you have a proud outlook on life, the place that will most often manifest is in how you spend your money.